Well, being reasonable in Washington means selling out. And you'll remember this from the night you were with us in 1994, when all of our key supporters said about 2 o'clock in the morning, please don't go to Washington and sell out. So the first thing is, you got to remember what you campaigned on, why you won, and you got to stick with it. He has a contract with the American voters. He has a new deal for African Americans. The Washington Post actually did a pretty good job of printing over 200 specific campaign promises. He needs to just check them off and not be reasonable, but insist that Washington change. Second, he cannot allow the urgent to drive out the important. He's got to get up every morning and remember, what is he trying to accomplish? How is he going to get it done? Because lots of little things will crowd in every day. They'll try to take away his energy and his time. It'll be even worse for his staff and his cabinet and others. So he's got to come back to the big things. He's got to stay focused on those things and not get off on other things. And finally, it's very important for him to figure out 3 to 5 things, no more, that are the key to his presidency, the things he wants to be measured on in 2020. And he has to come up every morning and say to himself, these are the things I'm going to make sure happen. Economic growth is clearly one of them. Dealing with the southern border is one. Fixing the health system has to be one. But he can't have more than about 5 big things and stay focused on them. That was the key to Reagan's success.
So about 5 things. But you hear the Washington Post actually printed out what they have, the 282 promises of Donald Trump. They got it right there. A lot of them are overlapping, obviously. You tell the story that when you became Speaker, 3 days later you went to the Heritage Foundation and you said these words, I will cooperate, but I won't compromise. You said reasonableness will be the death of Trumpism. Explain that.
Right. Well, Chuck Schumer's going to come in and say, let's be reasonable. I'll pass a bill you like as long as it's totally acceptable to Democrats and the public employee unions and liberals. But we can be reasonable. What that means is, why don't you give up everything you campaigned on, give up everything you promised the American people, and I'll be for you. And if Trump says, you know, I'm going to stick with what I believe in, what I campaigned on, what I got elected for, they will immediately scream, starting with the Washington Post and the New York Times, they will scream he's being unreasonable. And I think that's why something you and I agree on totally, they should rethink from the ground up the whole concept of the White House press corps, come up with a totally new grassroots model, and not allow the traditional media to dominate and define White House press coverage.
Let's talk about the rules of the Senate, because if any legislation is going to be stopped, it's going to be in the Senate. And we know that Harry Reid set a precedent, getting rid of using the nuclear option. And I think some Republicans are hesitant to do it themselves. But if things get stuck, for example, if Trump wants to really fix the economy, his plan's got to pass, and it's multifaceted. Energy independence is a big component. Eliminating Obamacare is a big component. A 15% corporate tax rate is a big component. 7 brackets to 3 is a big component. Repatriation money is a big component. Those are all big parts of what would be a recovery plan for the country. But let's say they try to filibuster. What does he do?
Well, you go to the country. There's a great book called The Education of Ronald Reagan, which I recommend everybody, by Tom Evans. Talks about how Reagan learned at General Electric how to communicate with people, how to move popular opinion. And his theory was that he would shine the light on the country and then the American people would turn up the heat on Congress. There are 23 Democratic senators up for re-election in 2018. Now, we should be able to find 6 to 8 of those senators who simply can't afford to vote no every day. And we should drive home again and again that we're either going to beat you or you're going to vote with us. And I think you start with things like reforming the Veterans Administration, having a tax cut for economic growth, and you win. But I'd be very cautious about radically changing the Senate. I think I'm close to Mitch McConnell on this for this reason. Every time Obama did something that was totally partisan, the stimulus, Obamacare, it backfired because totally partisan bills aren't very well thought out. There's a virtue to the legislative process.
Okay, a virtue, but I worry about one issue that they've talked about. And by the way, I do believe we need to rebuild our crumbling infrastructure, but they're talking about a $1 trillion price tag. I don't hear pay-as-you-go, although they have talked a lot about the penny plan, which I support. Is this, and here's the other problem. When we spent money on the stimulus, it was misappropriated. It went through the bureaucracy. It didn't end up getting to where it needed to go. Is there a way to pay for this as you go? Should there be a commission to discuss how to distribute those funds? $1 trillion is a lot of money.
Look, I'm very excited about this, and on December 13th, I'm going to give a speech at the Heritage Foundation on the principles of Trumpism, and this is one of the key areas. If we do a fundamental overhaul of how we do infrastructure, applying the lessons, for example, of the Woolman skating rink in Central Park, of the Ferry Point golf course that Trump built in the Bronx, where he literally took enormous amounts of cost out of the system. If we apply those kind of principles, we can build a huge infrastructure very inexpensively. If we apply the principles that Mitch Daniel used, that John Kasich used, that others have used among Republican governors, we can cut 30, 40, 50% out of the cost of infrastructure. If we then open up federal lands for minerals, open up federal lands for energy, we can generate over a 10-year period a huge amount of money that will enable us to actually pay for this. So you could put together a paid-for infrastructure program, but that requires a new approach. It requires giving up the baloney that Washington is dominated by and actually applying the principles Donald Trump has applied in his own life.
In other words, Democrats always want money. They always want to spend it. But, for example, you always get the tax increase. You never get the tax cut. You always get promises of
right.
You always get the government spending.
That's why you can't. That's why you can't be reasonable. That's why you got to come in and say, I'm prepared to give the Democratic mayors infrastructure if they're prepared to give us the ability to open up federal land for oil and gas and minerals. Now suddenly you got a package. Now, I think a lot of the mayors are going to say, I really need my roads, I really need my water system taken care of. I mean, you look at how bad the Flint, Michigan water system is. It's clear we have to have a substantial infrastructure program. But then you cut through the red tape and you apply the principles of Trump, and now you've got a very dynamic, exciting program.
All right. That's a big challenge. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Appreciate it.
It is.
Coming up